Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Dario from Next Pharma Summit with our 5th session at this Next Innovation Week US edition, and with a particular very interesting theme, which is what is the new normal or the next normal, how digital reps and content automation can drive better engagements in next year. And very glad to welcome from my left to the right, Alexey Cherchago, the Head of Sales Excellence Europe Sandoz. Hi, Alexey, how are you?
Hi, Dario. Everything is okay? Yourself? Everything is good?
Thank you. Sandy Donaldson, the CEO of the new founded company, Empiricus. Hi, Sandy, how are you?
Hi, Dario. I'm doing very well.
Jose Maria Avila, Global Lead HCP Marketing from Sanofi. How are you?
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. I'm fine, thank
Mark, the founder and CEO of ViiHealth. Hi, Mark, how are you?
Good morning, everybody.
And at this stage, I would like to pass the moderation to Paul Tunach, the founder of Pharma Forum, who will lead today's moderation. So, Paul, really glad to have you once again as moderator on Next Innovation Week, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Dario, and a pleasure to be here again. Great to moderate this panel. I think we're going to have a great discussion today. So the topic in question, we're going to look at digital reps, content automation, something which has really been thrown upside down by the treats that 2020 has brought to us in the form of COVID-19. But I think it's driven some interesting developments. We'll try and cover as much of that as we can. So without further ado, I want to launch into the questions. We've got quite a lot to get through, and I'm going to start with you, Alexey. You know, we talk about the digital rep and the future of reps and how this digital model is comparing to physical interaction and where that's all going. What does that actually mean, though? What is a digital rep, and where do you see this going?
Good question, Paul. Actually, who are these people, right? These are our field force colleagues who are currently reimagining customer engagement. With travel restrictions, bans on community gathering, work from home guidance, and understandable restrictions on access to healthcare settings, a perimeter around the role of the field force is definitely changing. Being trained to be effective in process-driven sales execution, right? Customer-facing colleagues should now rely on their skills and capabilities in the environment driven by, so to say, exponential disruption. In many cases, they engage with customers using a set of guidance principles rather than specific instructions like in the past. They're learning now pros and cons of different engagement channels, and also they try to leverage emotional intelligence. Like many others, they try to do their best to support physicians and patients operating in business unusual conditions, which are called next normal.
Yeah, it's a very different environment, isn't it? Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just would like to say that when we approach this difficult and interesting question, there are several elements, right? First of all, our customers, HCPs and patients, then our field forces, and this is the key objective of our discussion today, and the customer engagement. What is going on in between?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we sometimes forget that we talk a lot about the reps and how their world has changed, but the world for our customers has changed completely as well. So everything needs to adapt. Let me move on to Jose Maria, because I'd like to get your views on this. How are things changing? It's been a year of dramatic change. What are you seeing as the changes here?
Yeah, I think it's the question that everybody's asking themselves right now. I was putting together some information that I from my own research about how is the rep evolving from the customer perspective, right? So it's so important always to bring back what is the perspective of the HCP. And if you see this one, for example, the HCPs still prefer to communicate with pharma sales reps, right? Before COVID-19 times. And then they're claiming that majority of them are claiming that it's better for them to reach a sales rep for an immediate response. But and if you see there also, there's still some percentage that say that the rep is still better than a digital channel. And however, they still say that the rep is not completely meeting their expectations, right? So if you see, they say, I still prefer to communicate in person because I need that human factor, but the sales rep that I'm interacting with, they're not moving as fast as my needs are moving, right? So from my perspective, we are not there yet as an industry. The reps are probably trying to find out how to respond, and some of them may be already responding better. I have seen examples in my company where reps are being creative on responding, creating their own content, trying to make it more personalized, adapting to the social style of the HCP. But we're not there yet. So maybe we can ask this question to the audience. How we would like to learn from you. How confident do you feel that your sales reps actually can orchestrate a good customer experience over of your HCPs? So very confident, neutral, semi-confident, or not confident at all?
Yeah,
so I would
cast
like
your
to
votes and be honest. We're not going to call out who's voting in what way. It's an anonymous poll. We just give that a moment. I don't know whether we're getting some real-time votes on this, Dario, or whether we want to come back to this later.
Maybe we can leave it with 10 more seconds and afterwards comment on that, because we have some very interesting results.
Okay.
Cast
Nice.
your vote if you haven't already. Let's see how this comes through.
And the results are the winner with 0%.
Yeah,
Isn't that
and
interesting?
I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, it's honestly, if you ask me this question right now, I would feel semi-confident yet, because you will see it later in the discussion in another slide that I prepared for this presentation. Everybody right now in the industry is talking about customer experience, and this is, I truly believe that we should go into the creating customer experiences for our doctors. However, if you ask yourself, how are you measuring success of your reps? How are you training them? Have you invested, for example, in training them on what is a good customer experience? On what are the behaviors that you need to think about? What is the mindset that you have to be able to create a customer experience? You may be surprised that we haven't really invested in this type of topics.
Yeah, and the poll certainly suggests there's that bit of a skills gap, because it's not saying, are you doing it? It's sort of asking, can you do this? And still, nobody is saying they're very confident, more in the neutral or slightly unconfident sector. Very interesting results. Thank you, Jose Maria. Was there anything else you wanted to add before I move on? Because I'm keen to get the whole panel's view on this piece.
No, it's okay for me.
We'll come back to you in a bit then. I know there's more to cover. Mark, let me move on to you next. I'm really interested to get your perspective on this digital rep, and what is this essentially?
Well, I think over the last, if we accept 2020 for the moment, over the last 10 years, there's been a real build out step by step of the railroad tracks of digital transformation within pharma across the industry. And good thing that has been done over 10 years, because at least in the 2020 environment, there was an ability to react and use those channels that were already there, even though they were perhaps a low percentage of usage, but use those channels that were there and really push it forward. Now, if we look forward, we now know there's several vaccines that will eventually get approved, they'll get rolled out. But if we look forward into 2021, as things start to shift, really, are we going back to where we were? We don't think so. We think that it's moving forward to a next version, which is not where we are today. The reality is, but because those railroad tracks were at least laid and some baseline competence had been developed with the overall concept of the digital supply chain, we've seen a massive acceleration throughout this period of the pandemic in 2020, so much so that we certainly expect many of the companies to really be inside of 2021 with about 10 times the amount of usable content. at the core of a lot of the rep view of the past, what physicians would often say, show me something new, give me something that's up to date, that's more recent, that's materials that I can understand, that we can carry the conversation further. So gone are the days of the single detail aid that will last for a year and a half without a lot of other materials around it. This notion of getting more material through the channel, I think that has been the first stage of the industry. We've reacted to this environment to jump on it and create more content that meets these needs and try and push the speed and the timing so that we can move it forward. Now, if you move to the next slide, really what that means is that the next normal, we can take advantage of that. There's some content now that we can truly say could be omnichannel, that the reps can have this selection of capabilities, not just the railroad tracks that are laid, but how can we go further? How can we use the materials that are now being made available, make them easy to translate across those channels, and then also drive new customer experience, that the overall customer experience is that much more interesting. And I think Chema and Jose Maria, you mentioned at some point this notion of snackable content, and it's a great concept. It's not a technical term, snackable content, but it does conjure up the idea that physicians are all busy, all of our customers are busy. How can they consume some element of content on a more consistent basis throughout their day? They still spend an hour on medical content online generally throughout the day, but then it's generally now in much smaller time slices than it was, say, 10 years ago. So how can we now take advantage of this 10 times improvement, let's say, in total content that can be made available through the supply chain, which is getting faster and more automated? And can we move to materials and interactions where the rep is really still central and allow those physicians to go further? And a digital rep, I think, is a lot more than just triggering emails and doing live meetings. There's a lot of blended opportunities in the middle ground where they can be part of sending of messages. And I think there's a lot more discovery yet to be done, but at least, you know, we're headed towards that kind of viewpoint.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And as somebody myself who's very passionate about content, it's good to hear content being talked about as much as channels, because I think you absolutely need both. Sandy, let me come to you. You've been very patient, but I'm interested in your views on, do you agree with this vision you've heard so far of the digital rep, and are there things you'd like to add?
Yes and no. So for the last 10 years, we've had discussion about the digital rep being an orchestrator and being in that kind of central position. But quite frankly, in the last 10 years, the industry has not been able to put this in place. It's been a buzzword. And along came COVID, what actually is a fantastic catalyst for change, because it's forcing the hand of the industry to actually do something. I'm just not 100% convinced that we now have the legitimacy to put this in place. We've wasted 10 years. And the expectations on our customers, and let's talk about the physician being our customers for the moment, their expectations of digital on demand and how to access information is completely changed from, to Mark's point, where we used to have one PDF or a sales detail aid 10 years ago that would last for 12 months. So I think that we have got those foundations. As Mark pointed out, those tracks are there, but we're going to have to work very hard and diligently to actually be able to meet the expectations of our customers who now are used to the Amazon-like experience. So we still have a long way to go in terms of creating that tailored experience, creating that democratized, bite-sized content, which actually is going to be effective and usable by our customers. Still today, it's very hard to find a physician who turn around and say that they think that the $60 billion that the industry spends on marketing to physicians is money well spent. So we have to do quite a bit better in terms of moving forwards now with those tracks.
Yeah, we've got a way to go on customer experience is basically what we're saying there.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're speculating about where we're going to go with this, and no one really knows what this new normal, next normal is going to look like. But it feels to me that this digital future is going to be shaped by the people, and particularly the reps, if they don't continue to be on board with this journey, it's very hard to drive that kind of change. So, let's come back to the reps and think about what kind of skills they need to be those orchestrators, as we've been talking about for a while. Let me come back to you, Alexey, on this point. What are the key skills here? What do we need to be doing with the reps now to drive this digital future?
So let me start with one really, really important point from my perspective. It's emotional intelligence. To feel impact, for example, on pandemic on patients and physicians' life. The second one, which is getting more and more critical, I don't want to say that it was not so important in the past. It's about effective listening, to deeply understand customer needs, to be able to deliver experience, right? It should be clear understanding of customer needs, and to be able, for example, to choose the right approach of communication. Another point is ability, probably it is fully in line with our discussion now, it's ability to align customer engagement process with customer needs. And what is interesting that all these needs, they're evolving, and they are heavily impacted by the environment. Then I would also think about a couple of tools, right? A couple of things which brings infrastructure. And if we are talking about dynamic engagement process, it's not process driven, right? Like in the past, we created for the quarter a clear plan, homogeneous plan, all colleagues in all territories executed. It's not anymore. A lot of elements around regionalization, localization, the first point. The second one, it is always, the next step is always a function of outcome of the previous step of communication, like our discussion now, right? We put on the table interesting ideas, interesting concepts, and it's not kind of a rigorous plan. However, to support proper level of interactions with healthcare practitioners, we should have a proper, so to say, tools being flexible enough to provide recommendations and provide some structure on this communication, even if environment is changing, even if reactions are different for different healthcare practitioners.
Yeah, it's changing so quickly, isn't it? That's the challenge. Mark, let me come back to you next on this point, because I think what you presented was really interesting. And in essence, the way I view it is the rep is now becoming, we've used the term before, that orchestrator of different pieces of content, rather than going in with perhaps a more prescribed view of what they want to talk about. So it's more of a, I guess, more of a customer service type experience, isn't it? How do you see that changing the skills?
Well, ultimately, they're still the focal point of the relationship management. Whichever tools of the trade that they are using, that's the piece that is maintained and takes into account all those items that Alexey had mentioned in order to be able to quickly ascertain, better than any machine language or machine learning system, what's the right thing to do with this customer who they've known for the last 8 years, right? They're still going to be able to play that role. The difference is, while they've had some practice during the pandemic to use certain channels aggressively, there's 5 to 8 times, depending upon the market, more emails that are being sent, but of course, they almost all look the same. There's 5 to 8 times more remote meetings that have been scheduled and executed, and that's great, but they're essentially still live meetings and live discussions, which are generally not the only way that physicians will want to learn in the future and engage with their relationship managers in the future. They will want to also be able to interact with them through other forms of messaging that are not necessarily fully live per se. So I think it's very important that the representatives use this opportunity to become more comfortable with digital things, because the digital things of tomorrow we'll still use live meetings, we'll still use asynchronous emails and rep-triggered functions, but they might be different channels. It might be rep-triggered WeChat, it might be, video messaging that they're sending. And I think that ease of being able to work with digital, understand the differences that occur with timing and how they respond to their customers, to both transactions as well as requests, that will be a big piece of the training. And they cannot come at it the way, let's say, my parents would have, which would have been a fear of technologies, right? You really need to come at it from this Amazon experience that everybody has had over the last cycle, and really look forward. We're going into an environment where networks will be improving. The kinds of content can be much more exciting and robust and better delivered. So we would think that the next 10 years, you can actually drive a lot more different types of interactions. And right now, it would be critical for representatives just to become at ease with not being in the office, at ease with things that are happening through the digital channels. That's probably the key need right now to add to that emotional intelligence, which is absolutely always critical. And they'll maintain their role as relationship managers.
Yeah, and your comment there about your parents, the generational thing, of course, could be a factor here. We talk about reps, but there's all different ages and types of reps and different personalities, so they're probably all adapting in very different ways. Jose Maria, let me come back to you, because I'm really intrigued if you can share at all, what skills are you seeing, and has it changed since the beginning of COVID to even where we are now, that requirement for new skills?
Yeah, actually, if you see my slide that I prepared for this section, it's very much summarizing what Sandy and Mark said in the previous question, which is amazing because we are on the same mindsets. On the beginning, it's we haven't really nailed it on what this concept of the orchestrator rep is, and just summarizing that right now the reps are asking for help, right? Because they are adapting and trying to be responsive. But I guess that my key build on what has been discussed is I think that we need to train them into how to be adaptable, how to forget about the old model in the 1950s, right? That has been sticking with us for all this time, where the A doctors were visited more times and the B doctors less times, and repeating the message of the brand. So getting rid of those old ways, it's going to be the challenge, because the new skill should be how do you adapt? How do you personalize? For example, how do you forget about all doctors are the same and all doctors are going to receive the same message if lucky, right? Because we know that sometimes even the reps don't even talk about the brand at the visits, because it's trust. They're building a relationship. Sometimes they talk about the family, and they talk about other stuff that that don't necessarily is related to our brand. So how can they be more adaptable in case another pandemic like this or another situation like this happens, another black swan happens, and how can they be more adaptable and evolve their role? This is one of the key points for me. That's it's the most challenging.
Yeah, and to your point, we're changing the way things have been done in many cases for many, many years without shifting on too much. Suddenly the world has changed. So Sandy, I'm going to come to you again and perhaps be slightly more provocative in my question here. If you were setting up a new pharma company tomorrow and you could throw out all the rep training that's been done historically, how would you go about doing it in this environment?
Well, I would completely start from scratch. I think a lot of that rep training has been built on the push model, where it's all about repetition of message and a one-way dialogue. And I think we have to completely do a 180-degree turn to focus on the pull model and to see that kind of positioning, that value proposition of our reps has fundamentally changed. It's not anymore about trying to encourage people to just increase their sales prescriptions, but it's about trying to be a detective.
Yeah.
To Jose's point, it's not anymore just about, let me tell you about my brand, because that information is out there in so many different places. It used to be that the monopoly on product information was held by the reps. Now there's hundreds of places, hundreds of channels where you can access that information. So the reps in the future, from a training point of view, need to focus on the pull mode. They need those active listening skills that Alexey talked about. And they also need to understand that they're part of a portfolio which is telling a story. That story, they're just one of those components, one of those channels which is in use. But they also have a responsibility to get information from the physicians and put that back into the brain, which will allow people like Mark to create the very tailored content, which will then be able to actually address a specific need for them or potentially deliver a specific service. Because it's not anymore about traditional one-way marketing. It's about very specific, personalized understanding of what's that physician's needs, and then crafting solutions that involve basically the whole of the company and the resources at their fingertips to solve for their patients.
Yeah, I guess the kind of 2 ears and 1 mouth approach that people often talk about with sales, of listening, absorbing, and reacting to that.
And if I can add to that,
Mark,
Paul, one thing I would suggest is the data component too for the future training. You know, again, it's going to become increasingly important that our sales teams can understand the data so that they can then be able to create that tailored experience for their own customers too.
That's a great point. I've heard people reference there needs to be an element of data scientist in the rep of the future, which probably has some truth about it. Mark, let me come to you, and I think Sandy's teed you up quite nicely there with the reference to content. So I wanted to talk about content, as I say, something I'm very passionate about. And I think, you know, we touched on earlier, there's so much going on right now. HCPs in particular are being bombarded by content left, right, and center. So it's really hard to differentiate. How do we go about doing that within this environment? How do we try and get attention and be different?
Good question, and a great aspect. I think oftentimes if we go back to that notion of snackable content, right? You want to be able to have something that the customers can consume relatively easily and go deeper should they need to, which adds to the pull component. If you feed the machine 1 bite at a time, it will become that much more interesting. So how can we use forums? A very simple one is there's lots of RTEs out there that are happening and lots of campaign emails, but there's really a very poor experience of being able to deliver key messages within the email properly. You can really do a lot of things to put video and email together now, and that helps to raise the bar in terms of that one item of customer experience. And if you can have those physicians that then participate on that one detail, will have a slightly better experience than everybody else that is flooding their inbox. That can also help to drive the conversation forward. Those are small details of channels that are where the tracks are already laid, and it's really more about manipulation, not of new content, but just of the delivery engines themselves. And I think that's the advantage of having put some effort into creating the automation capability of delivery of content. It's no longer about manually making emails or manually making detail aids. Right. You're dealing with something where these are generated, and since they're generated, they can be informed by data, they can be properly personalized, and they can be tuned. So we can generate in cross-channel modes, we can generate videos that can then be used in an email out of the same detail aid content that was available and approved for Engage types of remote meetings, 2 months ago. Also, it means that content, as it's produced, let's say from a medical conference or new information that's relevant, physicians and our customers really want speed. They want something new. Sometimes it's just a new form or a new way to experience the same materials. And then there's also new data. So how can you combine those things very quickly and get materials into the system so that then physicians can consume some element of it and move forward? And it's, a few years ago, a pet peeve of mine was that very often a lot of vendors would put the blame on the regulatory environment about how slow things were in terms of getting content done. That was more or less true, but at the end of the day, it really wasn't the regulatory time. It was all of the churn around the manual processes that were involved. So having been able to cut those down and really focus on the supply chain, I think that's a key requirement for being able to turn that crank a lot faster, get those content and key messages into the system, be able to measure them properly so that you can tune them further and still be able to take advantage of that rep's role as a relationship manager as part of this whole environment.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I was going to come to you, Jose Maria, next on this to understand how you're changing. I was going to actually give it the opt-out and say, of course, this content has to be approved, it's regulated. But I think Mark's kind of headed that excuse off a little bit. So I'm really interested from your perspective to hear how you're adapting to this. It's a very different way of doing content.
Yes, but actually, first I think that I wanted to just give some context on just that we also have to be careful as an industry on how much content we are producing, right? Because according to what I have seen, 65% of all HCP interactions have decreased, which means that there's only a small portion of doctors who are open for digital engagements that are exposed to much more webinars, much more emailings, WhatsApps, you name it. And it is not the only content that they are receiving. They're also receiving all WhatsApps, Netflix, you name it, right? So it's, and then on top of that, they only have a span of attention of 8 seconds, right? So my case, the way that I think we should be going into, it's on, first of all, personalize, but on the human factor again. So thinking again of how much content is a specific doctor receiving, right? So not necessarily going into mass media creation of democratization of content, that all doctors receive a lot of content in many touch points, but rather having a quick overview per customer, right? To say, okay, this doctor has received the maximum amount of touch points or of messages to get to a point where it's going to come an opt-out. And I don't know if we have enough focus on that right now. This is my key focus at this point, to really identify what is the point of exactly because I was preparing this funny image for this because I think this is happening. I think this conversation is happening in your companies, right? Where everybody's like, we started webinars and everything, and everybody's like, well, we achieved 1,000 HCPs in the webinar. Oh no, we achieved 5,000, and everybody's focused on how many doctors they were able to bring to the webinar, but nobody's interested in if the doctor was really happy with the experience in the webinar, or if they changed any behavior in the webinar, right? So, to this point is we coming, and you will see it later on, the way we measure success, it's a key component. And how do we feedback? How do we keep track on the data on touch points, experience, and number of contents? This is going to be a key factor for how do we improve the development of an automatization of content in the future.
Yeah. It's almost the curse of digital, I would say, is this obsession with quantitative metrics and big numbers, which of course keeps management very happy a lot of the time, but that focus on quality, as you say, is a much more important thing. Sandy, I'll come back to you, and I think you referenced earlier that, you know, if it comes to product information, there's so many sources of information for doctors of product information. So it feels sometimes like, you know, pharma is fighting for its space of what should it be talking about, where can it be interesting? Do you have thoughts on what that space is shaping up to be?
Sure. And I think there's a big seismic change which is needed. And to Jose's point, there will always be increasing amounts of digital information out there. We have passed that point of no return, where it's going to be just more exponential amounts of information and channels. What we need to do is two things. We need to create better partnerships with other channels, and we need to democratize the content. Now, what do I mean by democratizing the content? If you today have your website for your brand, sometimes that information is very hard to find. And we need to move to a model of mass customization, where we're actually giving the users a gift. And the gift is, hey, come to our site, and through triage or some element of mass customization, we will help you very quickly identify what is it you actually need. Question number one, where are you located? What type of physician are you? What do you need? And then boom, here's what we can offer you. So that type of democratization of content is going to be vital for the future. And then secondly, the partnerships. I think a lot of industry has a challenge with legitimacy. It's not easy for all physicians to turn around and say, great, I'm going to go to Pfizer's website to get information. So I think increased partnerships are required with other channels and other entities to be able to fish where the fish are.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to your point there, particularly where that conversation is above the product level, which increasingly seems to be the entry point for these conversations, there is a big opportunity for that partnership and sharing the message, isn't there?
There is. And, you know, again, if you look at real life practice, that original question from a physician is never, I need to find more information about Lipitor. The question is, I have a challenge with a patient who just walked into my office. And that, I think, is also what we need to focus on, is that we don't jump automatically to the solution being the brand, but we listen carefully to what is the problem they're trying to solve.
Yeah. Well, Alexey, maybe that's something you can comment on. I'm keen to get your reflections on what you've heard about content, but also, you know, I know Sandoz as an organization has had a big focus on access to healthcare, I guess creates lots of partnership opportunities. Where do you think we're heading with content?
So let me reiterate our discussion a bit. You know, a couple of points which, for example, Sandy mentioned. The focus should be on customer experience, right? So, for example, we should move from brand-based content to customer preferred content. This is clear, right? And we're saying that we need to have the right content and the right channel and the right time with the right customer. It's pretty easy, but I have a feeling that it is not anymore as a kind of competitive advantage. It's a hygiene factor. These are the expectations of our customers to be in line with all these elements. And what we try to do now, we try to fine tune, you know, infrastructure, our customer-facing functions to be able to reach this. And expectations of our customers, HCPs and patients, you know, in the end of the day, they have this experience in their life with other service providers, not healthcare service providers. Talking about Sandoz, I would say that it's quite a lot of changes in the company for the moment, because when we are talking about generic companies, right, the quality of content, you know, is quite critical, quite important, and there are a lot of changes in infrastructure, and obviously we are focusing on different engines to generate relevant content. And this is something in the middle, because, you know, I would say I agree that it does make sense to discuss content without channel, but also talking about channel, only channel, it also does make sense, because all these things are coming together, right? It depends on what kind of message, what type of information we would like to share, right? And then we should find out the right channel for this according to good understanding of our customers. And coming back to the point which we discussed a bit earlier, it might be different for different customers, and the degree of personalization actually reflects success of our customer engagement interactions. What Hasemara mentioned, quality of engagement, right? We should move somehow from activity KPI, so to say, to a return on engagement, return on knowledge. You know, all these things which we try to build now in Sandoz, because in the end of the day, quality of our knowledge is a function of understanding of customer needs, and it is directly connected to the quality of our service, right? Why we would like to know more our customers, to be able to be relevant with our service. And I can see here a lot of changes in many elements which are far beyond whatever sales force effectiveness, which we know from the past.
Yeah, we'll touch on that in a moment, but your point about incentives and how we track, I think, is very, very valid. So last 20 minutes or so of this discussion, I'm going to ask you all to cast your minds forward and sort of gaze into your crystal balls of where all this is heading. So if you imagine, you know, a year, 18 months down the line, perhaps, hopefully COVID has gone, you never know, Trump may have even conceded the election, we'll see how that plays out. But I'm interested in your views on what the reps will be doing. And I want to weave in a question that's come in, because somebody's thrown a question in provocatively saying, do we still need the sales reps, in a sense of, will there still be people out there on the road going and doing these physical meetings? So I know I'm putting you on the spot with this question, but I'm interested in what you see as the biggest changes, maybe 18 months, 2 years down the line, as we come into this next normal, new normal. So Mark, can I come to you first on this?
Sure, and if you look at this year, it's really been about reacting to the situation. So there's lots of change, lots more digital, lots of stuff, and now plans for next generation engagements with most across the industry. 2021 we see as being an opportunity to really be proactive about continuing that effort, and because there will certainly be transitions through that that time period, and be able to both test new items as well as continue the push towards digital while trying to focus on the user experience and the overall customer experience. So there's a real opportunity to make sure that the physicians are getting the messages across the various channels that are in play, and also that the representatives are part and parcel of it. 2022, we see that as being, no matter what environment we're in at the end of 2021, we think that that will be different again. It's a now next step change where there's an opportunity to scale what's working well, what's really been developed, and really move towards what would then be that next normal, and likely of something that will carry forward for the next 5 to 10 years until the next crisis that hits us all. But at least this notion of that change, I don't think it's an overnight. This was what was. This is what's next, and onwards we go. It's a lockstep change where we have to ride that staircase and be able to make sure that we bring the whole company and the industry, and as well listen to the physicians. But we are in an opportunity to be able to proactively plan for that future. The question about are reps required? With the current environment, and also with many products, the reps have a role to fulfill for those products where it makes sense to invest that time. And those relationship managers will still have that role, whether they are part of a digital system or they're more working on their own in certain markets where they have less digital capability. I think those choices, though, as we move forward, allow us to be more proactive in our selection of where we deploy representatives, and using tools as the tools get better and as the systems become more responsive. Then we're able to move forward from that basis. Also, we have to put into play here the notion of time, the timing of getting materials out the door, being able to anticipate that customer's next need, because you understand their patient base, because you understand the positioning of the product, be able to anticipate. That's a place of significant investment, and I think we're really at the early days of that trend, to be able to really take data, help it to drive the kinds of digital content, and then push it through all the various channels, with the rep being central in several of them. I think we're very early in that entire ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes sense. Alexey, I'll come to you next. So will we have reps as they are now in a couple of years' time? And what will be the biggest difference if we do? What will they be doing that's much different?
Good question. I would say that, first of all, yes, we will, I think, but the biggest change will come actually from the purpose of the engagement, right? I think that it is more about why rather than how and what. I think that some changes will come with the actually ability to handle multidimensional questions and concerns because of evolving needs of healthcare practitioners. I believe that hybrid model will be a standard protocol of engagement in the future. It's not something extraordinary, right? And we can see, for example, that there is a increase in HCP consent rate. That means this protocol of communication is actually accepted, right? And I would say that due to disrupted customer journeys, right? Pharma companies, including reps, can provide some technical infrastructure such as apps and tools for remote diagnosis and monitoring, right? This is also slightly different from what we have now. Therefore, I think that hybrid engagement will be in place, but it is more partnership rather than bringing information around products. And as Sandy mentioned, we are moving from the push to pull mode, right? And it requires different skills, different infrastructure, and obviously different back office, different support from the side of our marketing and sales. There are a lot of changes here. You mentioned, Paul, incentives. Well, yeah, if emotional intelligence is in the middle of the engagement, then most probably we should be able somehow to reflect it in the performance management system, which is for the moment process oriented. You know, it is linear, it is homogeneous, but our way of engagement is much brighter, so to say, right? And therefore a lot of changes through the whole value chain for upstream process, for downstream process, I would expect.
Yeah, and your point there, which Jose Maria asked you to pick up on this point, but your point there about talking about things like digital diagnostics and those kind of things, I think is really interesting, because it comes back to the fact that physicians are also struggling with this new environment, and they do want to hear about some of these new things. So Jose Maria, can you pick up on that point? Do you see it going in that direction, more of that kind of, I guess, shift a little bit away from the brand specific content and that more holistic view?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I had a conversation about this in another Congress a couple of years ago, because we were discussing if the whole model of the industry is going to change, because that implies that you're going to provide solutions for patients beyond a brand or beyond medicine, right? And but I don't think that actually, coming from that discussion, I remember that the whole audience was really focused on, no, we should not change. Our core model is still provide medicines that doctors can prescribe, and that's it, right? And we probably are in a very early stage on that, because also the doctors are adopting telemedicine solutions or digital solutions in a faster way, but they're still trying to figure out what to do with the data. From the patient side and with the doctor side, there's too much data to be analyzed. I don't think we have the capabilities to manage all of that. And to the point of the sales reps, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, no, pick up on that, because I think we'll come back to this sort of broader change. That's something I wanted to finish on, but if there's something more you wanted to add about the sales reps, then yeah, please do.
So on the sales reps, I don't know if you can pull up the slide, one of the slides that I shared, because we have to remember that we are dealing with humans, right? So doctors are people, and they need the human factor. So I can agree with Mark and Alex on the point that sales reps are there. And I took the liberty to brainstorm with myself this slide that you're seeing here, because we're talking about the customer 360 view, right? And then there's a lot of capabilities out there, companies building these capabilities. But what does that mean for the rep, right? So how, in my mind, first we need to change the mindsets to make them obsessed with the customer experience of the HCPs, but also in the new knowledge, on top of the knowledge they already have, what if we gave them, for example, emotional storytelling training or user experience design, or for example, my favorite here, the thumb zone. If you're not familiar with the thumb zone, it's a user experience design capability that you use in your phone. There is a zone that you can reach with your thumb. So what if we train their sales reps to develop their own landing pages with this knowledge, democratizing the digital engagement. But on top of that, the new skill set, for example, right? The World Economic Forum said that by 2025, the 50% of the sales force of the workforce has to be reskilled. So, and these are the skills that they are recommending for us to focus on. And finally, the measurement. So, how do we transform those input KPIs? Like, for example, how do we measure customer experience quotient, for example? So this is just for something I took the liberty to develop. And if you go to the next slide, I will just focus a little bit on frequency. And this is like forgetting about frequency ABC or want to be an universe coverage and usage of detail aids, and rather orchestrating customer experiences, quality, right? Measuring customer and Net Promoter Score, content management.
Yeah, very interesting and very interesting brainstorm. I wonder, Dario, because I want to come on to Sandy on this question, but Dario, can we leave that first slide up? Because I'm quite interested to get Sandy's reaction to that and see if there's anything he'd like to add. Can we bring that slide back up? Yeah, this one. A lot of good information on there.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I'd agree with that. But I also want to come back to your original question, Paul, which was, around the future of the reps and what that's going to look like. Because just to throw a couple of stats out there, which are very important. Now, these are based in the US, and these come from the ZS Associates Affinity Monitor product and report. And it basically says that in 2012, access was at 76%. So access is defined by, can physicians see a rep? Do physicians want to see a rep? So from 2012 to 2019, that dropped to 46%.
Which is a big drop.
It is, and that was before COVID. Now, what's also interesting was Jose Maria referenced 2025. By 2025, the expectation for the US is that 70 to 75% of physicians will be millennials, because physicians are retiring very fast, and millennials are replacing them at 1.6, a rate of 1.6, because they're not willing to work the same length of hours. Now, the access to millennials is currently at 23%. So the industry is heading towards an iceberg. And if we don't start to prepare ourselves for different engagement, we're not going to be able to even have the reps knocking on the door of these millennial physicians who are completely fundamentally different in what they want in their interactions with industry. So I think this is great, but we also just need to be very cognizant of the external environment which is changing around us, and the fact that we're going to have to even increase our speed at being able to prepare for that.
Yeah, but pretty sobering stats. And I mean, you can always say, well, things have changed and we're evolving, but it's difficult to ignore those kind of statistics, isn't it?
It is. And as we know, our industry is slow to change. Again, we've been talking about industry or the multi-channel orchestrator for many years. So I think we really need to very rapidly change if we're going to be able to address keeping engagement with physicians in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the risk is we do start to get lost in the language a little bit. We can talk about the future of the sales rep, and then they become a multi-channel orchestrator. We can call these roles whatever we like. It's what they're doing and how they're operating that I think is going to make the big difference. So let's come back to this broader thoughts on the commercial model, because I think it all ties together. We've talked about what the rep's going to be doing. We touched on things like digital diagnostics and those things coming through, and pharma's place within there. So Jose Maria, let me come back to you on this. You probably, like me, have heard lots of views on where pharma's going, and does it become about medicines plus digital plus services? Does it stay in medicines? Where do you see things heading in the next 4 or 5 years?
I think the companies that right now, the companies that succeed at customer experience are going to be the ones that are going to be successful. So if you see, this is research that shows that companies that focus on CX, they are expecting to earn additional 700 million within the next 3 years, right? And then, so I think it's the key. But I think we need to think about broader. What does customer experience mean? If it has an impact on processes, if it has an impact on our business model, if we really need to go beyond and say, forget about the medicine. Now let's start talking about digital solutions, or beyond the pill solution that are going to become more important. So I guess that's going beyond 5 years, where artificial intelligence is supposed to play a key role. I wanted to bring you this perspective. And that also comes into personalized experience. So this is a Harvard Business Review article that I found, that they were testing different preferences where the people trust more AI or people, right? And then they were testing different products, not pharma products. This was a hair care. It was a cake, and they found that the more functional aspects of the brand are presented to the patient or consumer, the more focused, the more they trust the AI. And then it's more about experience, customer experience, and hedonic features. They trust more the people, right? So, but now think about it. What does that mean for healthcare? Is your brand focusing on functional or hedonic aspects? And I would like to ask a key question, a polling question, if we have the time, which is, if you think that your targeted HCPs would prefer, so if they would prefer a pharma product recommended by an AI or a pharma product recommended by a human, right? And
so while we're gathering votes on that poll, because we are getting towards the end, do vote on that. We're going to come back to that, but maybe Alexey, I can come to you and just get your perspective on how you see the commercial model shifting next 4 or 5 years, and then we'll come and take a look at this poll.
So I would like to put a couple of things. First of all, what we can see even now, right? It's more financial pressure on hospital and clinics, right? That makes roles of key account managers, even more important than now. This is something, a transition from individual selling to team selling. We also discussed today a bit impact on people, but I think that we will have a lot of impact on processes and systems. And this is a transition from process-oriented sales, sales execution to more sophisticated, more localized models, where personalization of engagement will be in the center, rather than selling of some specific products or brands. To be able to support more flexible commercial models, right? Discuss performance management and incentives will be updated, and we have a couple of examples around this one even now in some companies, including Sandoz and broader Novartis. And I think that emotional intelligence will be one of the key success factors, and this is something which will be in the training curriculum of customer-facing functions in back office.
Yeah.
More changes will come also in the areas of drug supply, home delivery of care, for example, and in general, different types of patient support programs. This is how we can see the situation.
Yeah, and we had our poll, as you were presenting that, we had our poll come up as well. I agree with the emotional intelligence point. That's a great point. I think we had 28% of people saying they trust AI more, 72% the sort of human. I'm quite surprised that 28% is so high. What do you make of that, Jose Maria?
Yeah, I mean, it's higher than I expected, honestly, because I thought that the human factor was still there, but it's hinting us that probably there's going to be a shift now in the mindset, right, in the preferences.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I guess people have referenced earlier the Amazon experience. Of course, that's kind of what Amazon's doing. We all get products recommended by the AI that sits behind Amazon, and we very often buy those products. So maybe it's acknowledging that is the way that we behave. Mark, let me come to you. This broader question of next 4 to 5 years and shift in the commercial model. Is it clear to you where things are heading?
Well, I think it's clear that there will be more digital. There will be more different, easier, more quickly generated expressions of content, of materials that can be delivered both with the rep or orchestrated by the rep or in place of the rep. So, and all at once. And really the role is not about just I orchestrate. And I think that role from 2015, that image of a rep being able to select at the center, selecting which channels are deployed, not exactly quite right. I think it's more of a maestro of it with an orchestra. There's many more notes, and really that maestro is about hitting the highlights and remembering the cadence and being able to judge the emotion in the music piece in order to hit those pieces that are rolling independently also of that representative, to be able to rise above the noise. So I think the next few years will be, and is very important, that we continue to build out the ease and simplicity of having materials and digital content, the ability to test them, A/B test them in different environments. We gather that data, we drive the cost metrics down through reuse of materials, of original content, and then can play it out across multiple markets or multiple channels. All of that has to happen at the same time as the infrastructure and AI learning that can help to feed what the models should be for that next generation engagement. Ultimately, if the systems of AI are informing the representative that Dr. X would most likely benefit from this kind of messaging, then that is a great application of AI. It might not be something where the physician themselves, signs up to a service which is providing that answer to them directly. It might still come through the representative, and that's an appropriate usage of technology. So I think in the short term, which is really the next couple of years, is continued investment and build out, ensuring to drive the speed up, the cost down, test different engagements, and ensure that the representatives where they are deployed, become more comfortable, more at ease with being the maestro in their environment rather than just at the center of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Sandy, I'm going to come back to you for the final word because we're up against time. So let's go back to our fictional pharma company that we're launching, and it's 2024, 2025. How different would the commercial model look?
It's going to be radically different if you want to succeed. If we stay on the current course of very incremental steps, we're just going to be completely irrelevant and lose legitimacy. Come back to those access figures. We're not going to have the opportunity to knock on the doors and have discussions with doctors. So just very briefly, I think it's going to be much more trigger-based. As we move really from push to pull, it'll be that we see data points that indicate a physician is ready or they're willing to actually now engage with us, and we need to get our teams then ready to jump in very quickly with a very personalized solution that is very impactful.
I think that's a good point on which to close things out. Sandy, I want to say thank you to all of you for joining today. I think it's been a fantastic discussion, covered lots of ground, very interesting, and lots to reflect on. Thank you to all of you who've been viewing, and I'll hand back over to Dario for any final words.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, all panelists, Alexey, Sandy, Mark, and Jose Maria. Well, I have nothing to add. Definitely, some very interesting times are in front of us, and we will see what the future will bring. I think that this is the only crystal ball which we can look into, right? However, there was one comment which I really need to read, and this is pretty much aligned with the overall discussion today, and this is that face-to-face reps will not be going away anytime soon. Right? The only question is, and I really hear this a lot, is that we definitely will have a transition from quantity to quality. And definitely, I think that the next stage is then the Sandy stage, like he said, that we will finally reach the stage of other industries. Because just one example, CRM as a tool in pharma is like 10 years behind from any other industry, right?
Yeah.
So that's my final word. So thank you very much once again for joining today, and take care, and hopefully we see each other next year in person, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.